Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the attendees of this first colloquium of the International Foundation of Robotic Research on Surgical Robotics. My name is Paolo Dario from the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna in Pisa, Italy, and I'm serving as a moderator of this colloquium. I'd like to start by introducing the welcome message of the IFRR President, Professor Usama Khatib.
Colleagues and friends, on behalf of IFRR, I would like to extend to you a warm welcome to the Robotics Global Colloquia, a platform for discussion and interaction on a wide range of issues in our field. The colloquia are bi-weekly events scheduled every other Thursday, alternating between panels and speakers. This summer, we will have 3 panels: Surgical Robotics, moderated by Paolo Dario, Field Robotics, moderated by Craig Dudek, and Data-Driven and Model-Based Robotics, moderated by David Su. We will also have 3 speakers: Shigeo Hirose, Vijay Kumar, and Danica Rajesh. I'm delighted to introduce today's panel with Kanako Harada, Tim Luth, and Catherine Moore, moderated by Paolo Dario. A very warm welcome to our panelists.
Okay, so let's start this adventure. I repeat the names of the panelists: Professor Kanako Harada from Tokyo University, Professor Tim Luth from the Technical University of Munich, and Dr. Catherine Moore from Intuitive Surgical. Those are really distinguished speakers from 3 large geographical areas and covering different facets of surgical robotics. I'd like to start with a short account about surgical robotics. Surgical robotics today is the result of a historical evolution that moves from prehistory, and from incredible research and results at that time in ancient times and in different areas. So with the breakthrough of people like Pasteur discovering bacteria or Sir Alexander Fleming discovering penicillin, a convergence of different fields from anesthetics, antiseptics, anticoagulants, and antibiotics moved to create what is today the technology of surgery. The discovery of cylindrical lens allowing to introduce laparoscopic surgery and minimally invasive surgery as a result of the convergence of these phenomena. And laparoscopic surgery was a breakthrough at that time and took a lot of advantages from the technology of miniaturization, but also from images. The role of imaging is really extraordinary in the evolution of surgery. And so from modern to computer-assisted surgery to robotic surgery, beginning in the 80s with pioneers daring to move robots in the brain or in the prostate, and moving on with the famous RoboDoc that in 1992 was applied the first in history in real humans in orthopedic surgery, or again, computer of image-guided surgery or teleoperated surgery with the advent and the introduction of the Intuitive Surgical Da Vinci robot, and pioneers like Catherine we have with us, and very advanced instruments that today make the reality that started, as I said, in the late 80s, but is going today. And looking to the future with inspiration from science fiction, that, however, is now an engineering effort. and miniaturized tools and capsule endoscopy are the frontier that has been pioneered also by a number of what we can call heroes, because great adventures have many heroes. And here are few names of pioneers and picture of many pioneers who have made the history of robotic surgery. And of course, there are many more. So today in this colloquium, we are covering and addressing some issues like the state of the art in surgical robotics. What are the top challenges according to the panelists? What are the future directions that panelists believe would be the future of research and technology and clinical application? The most exciting developments, and last but not least, how COVID-19 has had an impact on and will have an impact on surgical robotics. And you can address your questions anytime and comment using Slido and using this link. So that I'd like to give the floor to the first panelist, Professor Kanako Arada from Tokyo University. Kanako.
Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And first, I'd like to thank Professor Dalio, Professor Khatib, and IFRR for giving me such a great opportunity. And today I'm talking about surgical robots for microsurgery. My talk includes 5 items, just Professor Dalio explained, which we will talk about during the panel discussion, specifically state of the art and the top 5 challenges and what I would do if I know I will be successful, and what has excited me most, and the next 5 years and the COVID-19 change. So many researchers have been working on surgical robots for microsurgery. The intuitive surgical is dominant in surgical robotic domain, as you know, but there are 3 companies working on microsurgery. Medical Micro Instruments and Microsurgery are targeting microsurgery, and Musa by Microsurgery recently did its first in human in 2020, this year, and this excited me a lot. And Precise is a retinal surgical robot, and it also did first in human in 2018. And in microsurgery, surgical robots can go beyond human precision, and such robot can be capable of performing surgery that is infeasible without robotic assistance. This is exactly my motivation for research. And we also have been developing several microsurgical robots in our laboratory. The latest one is a smart arm, which can be used for endonasal bimanual suturing in neurosurgery. And by changing the robotic tools, it can be used for vitreoretinal surgery and also for pediatric surgery. You know, the number of patients for microsurgery is much smaller compared to that for laparoscopic surgery. And this versatile design would be a promising solution for the cost of robotic microsurgery, I believe. And next, I'm talking about top 5 challenges in surgical robots. I think we still haven't solved yet. And the first is user interface. Most surgical robots employ master-slave control, and it's easy to do dexterous tasks. But inserting, removing, or changing robotic tool is difficult. And besides, developing dozens of robotic tools is very costly. So we are also developing the co-manipulation interface, and it's easy to insert, remove, or change robotic tools. And it's also easy to combine other non-robotic tools like electrical scalpel, but it's difficult to manipulate. So I think that the robot can switch the control mode from telemanipulation to co-manipulation or vice versa, even during surgery, but we still need to study. And another problem about the user interface is feedback to surgeon. So in operating rooms, surgeons need to pay attention to many monitors, alarming sounds, and there are also many foot pedals on the floor. So even when we can provide a lot of information, we have to process it and study how to feed it back to surgeon. Another challenge is automation. So we are not going to replace surgeons, or we are not replicating the surgeon's motion, but we want to provide smart tools for surgeon. So for example, which robot would you like? A robot telling that, no, dangerous, no, move right, move, no, left. Or your input was automatically modified and the collision was avoided, sir. So the answer will be obvious. So that's why we are developing autonomous collision avoidance, so that the surgeon can move the robot even without realizing the workspace limit. And we're also developing automation for skilled operation. For example, it is known that the skilled surgeon grasp needle like this way. This is an unskilled surgeon's grasping. So instead of fancy automation, this simple rotation of the needle may be satisfactory for this application. And when we discuss automation, we also need to know medical device regulation. We tend to discuss robotic performance, like accuracy, but what is regulated is efficacy and safety. So we have to be sure that the robotic performance we are targeting is strongly correlated with efficacy and safety. Sorry. Okay, and next challenge will be next challenge will be cyber physical integration. So you know that obviously we don't want surgeons to try a new expensive robot without an intensive practice. And we also don't want our students to try a new control without careful testing. So we are developing virtual reality simulators to optimize the robotic control before it will be used in a real physical robot, and also for surgeons to practice manipulation. Such virtual reality simulators can be also used to create data sets for machine learning. And now we are going toward this direction. And the next challenge will be the customization. We have discussed a lot about the customization to patients, and it still hasn't yet solved. And I want to discuss customization to surgeons as well. So we want to provide assistance so that experts can go beyond he or her own limit. And also we want novices to perform surgery like experts, and the assistance should be different. So we want to discuss this customization. And last challenge I want to mention is contribution. So when we want to contribute to clinical application, before you start to design a robot, you have to study medical device regulation by paying attention to domestic and international differences, and also potential market. You know that the current number of patients is not the target patients for robotic surgery, of your robot surgery. And we also need to study IP management and the business model. And we also need to contribute to non-surgical robotics. So we use many technology originally developed in non-surgical robots or industrial application. But I'm afraid that not so many technologies have been transferred to from surgical robot to non-surgical robotic domain. So this is what we really need in the near future. And another question I was asked is about the surgical robot in the near future. I think that the further integration with computer-assisted surgical technologies will be intensively studied in the next 5 years, including medical imaging, medical image processing, navigation, VR, AR, workflow analysis, skill assessment, and digital operating room. And I'm personally interested in drug-robot combination device. And also I'm interested in challenges for difficult surgical applications which are infeasible without robotic assistance, like neonatal surgery or super microsurgery. So the last slide is about COVID-19. Surgical robotic technologies can be easily applied to robots for super dirty or super clean environments or objects. So for example, robot can be used for the test for infected people or animal or new drug development. And recently, Medicaloid, it's a surgical robotic company, announced that they're going to develop a PCR swab test robot. And we are also developing a pathology grossing examination robot by using the smart arm technologies. And we hope to apply this robot to the COVID-19 application. And there are also some robots for laboratory assistance, and we can also apply surgical robotic technologies to for this application. Okay, so that's all. Thank you for your attention, and I also thank my colleagues and grants financially supported these research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kanako. And let me just move to the next speaker. Share screen. Oh, I cannot share my screen. Okay, but team is already there, so it's fine. Professor Tim Luth, please.
Can you already see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So, hello everybody. I also like to thank first Paolo and Osama for inviting me. And maybe a little bit about my background. I'm an engineer, but from 1997 to 2005, I was also co-director of a surgical clinic in the Charité in Berlin. So my point of view is sometimes a little bit application oriented. And we shared a little bit a task, and Catherine will talk about the telemanipulation robot later, and I think the robotics part. So I got the part to talk a little bit about navigated tools and disposable manipulators. Can you see my slide completely from left to right? Okay. So I see a lot of different applications, but robots, typically if we talk about robots, many people think about robots in radiation therapy, which the CyberKnife is, for example, but also the electro devices. So the robot that have a beam killing tumor cells, which is an invasive procedure, but there's no tactile contact to the patient. And recently also the angiography and the volumetric tomography is accelerated by the use of robots. So for example, Siemens is offering, or now KUKA-based robot system, angio systems, which are also invasive because of the X-ray, but not tactile. And most of the robotics people think robots are robots for intervention. This is tactile and invasive. And I just show here three, which are a little bit more, I would say, interesting for me, because one, Mazor from Moshe Shoham in Israel, originally a very small device, was sold to Medtronic, and now we see again these devices, Mazor X, so robots that hold guides or templates for drilling machines. Or Cassination, a startup in Bern in Switzerland, mills cochlear implants, and Artas, a robot that put our hair cells and help the middle-aged people to get a new face. Okay. Yeah, but in fact, we should not talk about robots. We should talk about assistants and assistants in helping doctors for patient imaging and patient intervention. So in fact, we talk about assistant systems. And for me, there are three main assistant technologies. One is a robotics technology. For me, I saw here from Brian Davis, 89, the first devices. And it's something like, assistant, please move my instrument or my effector to the position at the patient that I see or that is marked in the image. And there are three different technologies. I will explain briefly. Image-guided offline programmed robots, hands-on and telemanipulated. At the same time, we had the navigation technology I talk about. It means assistant, please mark continuously in a recorded image where my instrument is in the patient body. The challenges are hard tissue, soft tissue, and blood vessel systems. And there's also an additional technology, navigated power control, which allows to do something in between robotics and navigation. It allows the surgeon to carry and to guide the instrument manually, but the accuracy is similar to a robotics device since the power of the instrument is controlled by a computer. Here, the offline program typically uses standard sequence. If you mill out a cavity, for example, for a knee, the Robodoc, the original Robodoc application or CASPA applications, then you have a special shape in the bone that should be removed. The hands-on robotics, we did it already in Berlin, 1997, but it's a product from Microsurgery. The ReRobot is in fact a 3D geometry boundary template. So the doctor is moving the milling machine manually, but the borders are controlled by the robot. So the robot becomes stiff by potential fields. And this is, for example, used to remove the bone tissue for the total knee or partial knee applications. And I think Catherine will talk about telemanipulation. In navigation, we see the typical navigation systems also for active instruments like drills, a screen, a stereo camera, for example, and the registration is taking place by hard tissue point contact or point clouds. So this is very famous and in use in many applications, ENT surgery, maxillofacial surgery, orthopedics. And typically the robots, if they use in these fields, are always coupled with a navigation system. A challenge since about, I would say, at least 15 years is the soft tissue registration. We see this in open brain surgery, where it's quite possible, but mainly in liver surgery, because the liver is also deformable. And as soon as you take the liver out of the body, it's very hard to find the cancer tumors inside of the tissue. But still, there are companies like Stefan Weber's Cassination in Bern who want to address this point. And most recently, the blood vessel registration is a new concept for navigation, where you start to navigate completely inside of the vessels. It's also used for catheter guidance. And I think we will see a lot of robots in this field in future too. So the application here is to move a TAVI, so an aortic valve replacement stent, into the heart and then fold it out. And this can be done with some technologies that measure in a different manner intracorporeal movements. Here I want to talk about the navigated power control assistance, also state of the art. Originally here on the left side, you see that a human is able to mill out freehand completely the cavities for a partial knee replacement. It's interesting because typically we are unable to make perfect 3D shapes manually, but if you control at the same time the power of the instrument by navigation system, you achieve really the same results as with a robot, but for much lower costs. For example, company Bluebell, Smith & Nephew, is using this in a different manner, where the instrument, the tip of the instrument is covered, and by this, the removal of the bone is stopped. And recently, this I want to show is the geometry change. I hope it's not too noisy. So here the point is, that the geometry of the tools change, and by this you can switch on and off the power. Yeah, the measurement technology today is either stereotactic, mainly used still in neurosurgery, or electromagnetic, standard in ENT today, and getting more into spine surgery too. And here the challenge is still that the electromagnetic fields are disturbed by metal and by the drills of the instruments. So as soon as you develop a surgical robot, you have to deal with it. There are some companies like Medtronic that have their own field generator and can cover some aspects. It's also important that not all navigation systems technologies work always with 3D images, with tomographic images. There are still systems that are able to work just with 2D orthogonal image recording, so which is very fast and can be done intraoperatively. Here's a product from Joymax. And also it's necessary to understand that the imaging technology and the navigation somehow changed over time. So in the beginning, we were happy to see the geometry of the tools as overlays in the navigation images. The next step was then to bring the real-time camera images from the endoscopes to show the doctors if the endoscope is not a straight endoscope, but a 30-degree or 45-degree or 70-degree endoscope, where the endoscope is looking to, because this makes often a mistake if people operate at the wrong position. Then we have path planning and waypoint navigation. So if a doctor operates, he gets information where he wants to go to and what is the ideal tool. Then we have today a reliable endoscope augmentation. So it's possible with an error of, I would say, 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters, the same level as we have in navigation, to augmentate images, for example, here a path, and coming from the 3D endoscope needs, so there are 3D endoscopes, like in the, for example, already was in the intuitive robot, but also we see these endoscopes now in the normal ENT operations, we have a 3D monitor. And finally, for me, always interesting is the manipulator technology in the 3D printing of manipulators, also state of the art. So we saw the first cheap robots in 10 years ago, or about 8 years ago, the 3D printed Jackos. But I'm always impressed that it's possible to build very cheap devices that are able to manipulate objects similar to a robotic device. Unfortunately, you see the video very slow, so maybe better. I just want to come quick to the challenges. For me, there are 5 challenges, and I think one is the automatic design of robot grippers and robot controls, because it takes too long. Typically, a PhD thesis is one robot. So, and if it fails, there is no second chance, so we develop quite slow. For me, still important is that the medical application is our goal and not the technology. So I think it's important to solve medical problems. For that, I would train engineers as doctors. So I think engineers should work inside of a clinic and doctors should learn engineering. I'm always surprised that if an operation fails because a robot was misdesigned or a bad design, the doctors explain me, oh, Tim, don't feel sorry. Next week we have the next operation. Just try your robot, the new robot next week. So the doctors still believe we are able to design a robot within a week. Yeah, and it could be helpful if famous research teams don't want to become famous, but they want to change the state of the art in medicine. And if I would look for a robot, I think a cheap robot teachable by everybody is still missing. Yeah, if I would have a chance to develop something in the future, I wish to develop a robot that cleans vessel from inside to get rid of stents and grafts. In the past 12 months, most excited I was by the possibility to design mechanisms and grippers fully automatically within seconds. It comes from it comes from topology optimization with large displacements. Very interesting to see. And COVID-19, I think there's still an urgent need for a very simple light robot arm that can be taught and operated by non-experts in direct proximity of humans. We saw in the COVID-19 disease story a lot of people who were exposed to risks, and I didn't understand why we have a simple robot. Even I had to go to the hospital this time and experience this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, team. Thanks a lot to Kanako first and team also to be really very, how to say, to posing very, very challenging issues that I would be glad to discuss, or we would be glad to discuss with the audience. And now Catherine, actually Catherine is like a doctor trained as an engineer, or as an engineer trained as a doctor. Maybe you can tell us part of your history at Intuitive Surgical and of course more. Catherine Moore.
Thank you very much, Professor Dario. And thank you also, Professor Luth and Harada. You guys, as we're going to be bookending these various different talks about surgical robots, I actually had the opportunity to change one of my slides in response to some of the things that you guys were saying, so that you got real-time updates on this. So Intuitive Surgical, I'm head of the Intuitive Foundation, and I ran research for Intuitive for quite a while, and also a lot of emerging market strategy, both trained as a doctor and as a mechanical engineer. So I get to speak geek speak and medical jargon at the same time. Because Intuitive has a lot of robots out there right now, most of what I'm going to be talking about in terms of state of the art is specific to the sort of intuitive surgical robots that are out there now. So this one is the Intuitive Da Vinci Xi. And it is a 3-instrument arm, 1 camera arm telemanipulator. But most of the structure really, if you're thinking clinically, is there just to drive this instrument inside the body. This is the business end. And as Professor Harada was talking about, a lot of the sort of the magic of what we're doing with surgical robots has to do with the interfaces. Can we make an interface such that we can take what the surgeon wants to do without having to process it through a whole lot of, you know, like a game controller, in order to be able to make it do what it is that they're intending to do. And in a lot of the robots that we've, I wasn't going to talk about that. In a lot of the robots we have right now, the intention, because it's laparoscopic, because the analogies are to what we've done with our hands directly in the robot, those have been relatively easier interfaces to design. But as we really start to move into a lot of the different kinds of robots in the microsurgical or the flexible realm, the straight analogy to the hand starts getting very different. The slide that I jumped to early was really just how many procedures are being done robotically in the world right now. The robot that I showed you, the Xi, and the sort of the previous ones associated with it are now doing more than 1.2 million procedures per year. Now, COVID may change some of that. This year, we've seen a huge fall off in terms of elective surgeries. But as you can see, as a lot of these surgeries are cancer surgeries, as soon as operating rooms opened back up again, these procedures were starting back up again as well. Talking about some of the robots that are hard on the heels of that Xi, this is the SP single port. And what's interesting about this one is it brings multiple instruments in parallel. And the procedures that are getting developed for this are no longer analogs of the laparoscopic procedures. We can now start thinking about entering through the skin surface and tunneling for a ways, and then being able to do a surgical operation. So you can start thinking about doing vascular surgery in the groin or in the lower abdomen from an entry wound in the thigh. And so it's this different relationship between the way we're bringing instruments in and the way we're manipulating that starts to let us really think about different kinds of surgical procedures. One of the things that we've struggled with focusing on is lung cancer. And one of the reasons why lung cancer is incredibly stressful and frustrating to try to treat is most of the time we find it very late. And so we can build a very fancy robot in order to be able to take that tumor out minimally invasively, but still it's a 15% survival rate at 5 years at the stage at which we're finding lung cancer globally. And so the approach to try to fix this, and this is integrating imaging and thinking about micro manipulators at the end of the catheter. This is the ion catheter robot. And you can see it here in the operating room or in the bronchoscopy suite, kind of brings the acuity down. And so this is enabled by a shape sensor that's inside the catheter that allows you to have stiff control and fine control of a flexible robot. And so around that robot, you're adding in imaging and anesthesia and all of these other things. But for the first time, our robot's actually one of the smaller things in the suite, as opposed to like the behemoth that's sitting there. And so these have been, these are now FDA approved, not yet CE marked, so you can't quite get them in Europe, but soon, hopefully. This is from the first in human trials. This image is from the first in human trials that were run in Australia. And as you can see, if you've got the camera's eye view of from the catheter, navigating your way down, and this is really a lot of the things that Tim was talking about, navigating by vision is incredibly challenging and it's easy to get lost. And so being able to have a navigation tool that helps you find your way is critical. Also state of the art, we are integrating imaging onto the platforms. This is the fluorescence imaging where we can tag molecules that fluoresce in the near infrared, and we can highlight ureters or bile ducts or things like sentinel nodes, so the first lymph node that comes off of a cancer, and integrating that into the view of the robot. We also can take preoperative 3D images, segment them so that you can look at the vasculature and overlay that in real time in the image and be able to give the surgeon an idea of what sorts of structures are sitting below the surface. So I was asked to talk about challenges. I'm not going to talk about any technical challenges. The biggest challenges that I see facing people that want to bring out new robots are regulatory. And this is not to say that regulation is bad, but when we are looking at, say, like the European medical device rules or the US FDA, the way in which these regulations are set up place significant barriers in the way of translational research out of the universities, like you're hearing about. These small companies that are trying to be able to bring their robots out face many years of clinical trials and millions of dollars before they can start to bring something out. And so that gets to the next problem, which is economics. Because you bring a robot, you bring technology into an operating room, you're going to increase the cost inside that operating room. You cannot make that robot cost less than zero. And so you will always bring more cost inside the operating room. But the idea is that you're saving cost downstream. You're avoiding other procedures. You're avoiding downstream complications. It's very easy to measure the cost that you bring into an operating room, and it's very difficult to measure the cost that you save downstream, because you need deployment for that to be calculated for the downstream cost. And so this is another major barrier for new robots that are coming out, in that you've got to prove that you're going to provide those savings when you don't have the opportunity to prove that you can provide those savings. Everyone touched on training. The way our medical system is set up right now, you learn during your residency, but there are very few opportunities to learn how to use a new technology after your residency. And every time you're bringing a new technology in, you have a whole set of clinicians out there who've never used your robot and somehow have to be able to learn how to use your robot in the context of a medical system that doesn't sort of provide this later training. And so a lot of you'll see for me, a lot of the things I want to work on have to do with later career training and how we think about integrating these new technologies that are ever going to be speeding up, I hope, in their introduction into surgical training. This gets into privacy. Right now, the privacy rules are set up around a consumer culture, and they are intended to protect consumers. And this is really, really important. But medical privacy and consumer privacy are very different things. And we're talking about needing to collect large amounts of clinical data to be able to build the kinds of AI training tools that we want to be able to build in these spaces. And we're going to need to figure out how we manage data privacy as an industry, as an academic industry government group, so that we can be able to use machine learning and AI tools in a way that will protect people's privacy. But right now, the consumer privacy laws are not going to do it. And then, as we've really seen, these are complicated systems, and no single country is capable of producing all of the components of even one of the robots that's out on the market right now. And when we have global pandemics, when we have disasters, when we have earthquakes, there are big interruptions in this global supply chain. And this expertise is not spread evenly. So there's a lot of interesting challenges, and you'll notice that none of them really are very technical. I think there's a lot of interesting problems to solve, but I think of those as opportunities rather than challenges. These are challenges. So what am I most excited about? What do I want to do? Well, I touched on training, and I touched on privacy, and I touched on the regulations, because all of those come to bear on, as we're really thinking about how do we bring these new technologies into medical practice. Being able to figure out how we can educate surgeons, how we can give them feedback in real time, how people can train and coach outside of the classical training that assumes you get trained at the beginning and then you practice medicine in the same way for the rest of your career. This was going to be essential for us to be able to bring out these kinds of new tools. And so we've been playing around with this at Intuitive in that you can take a video, as someone has been doing a procedure, you can segment it. Right now we're manually segmenting it. Ideally, eventually we're auto-segmenting it. Auto-segmenting tools are getting better. And you can really start to think about comparing not just how one person learns over a period of time, but how 1,000 different surgeons do exactly the same step. And now you start to be able to build in AI coaching. You start to be able to observe the practice of one clinician using this robot and be able to coach them into the next stages of what it is that they need to do. And you can build real simulation tools as opposed to, giving a set of tasks, but no meaningful way of giving feedback so that people can improve. And this is really going to be important, because in the next 10 years, there will be another billion people that come into the global middle class. 380 million of those are going to be in India. So that's like the entire population of the United States coming online as a set of consumers who now want to purchase healthcare. There aren't enough surgeons in India, and right now to train to be an oncologic surgeon, there's about 400 per year that graduate from all of the medical schools all over India in that kind of super specialty training. So you've got 400 new oncologic surgeons coming on every year for about 380 million new people, never mind the number that are already in India who are middle class and have not enough surgeons. So the training of new surgeons is going to be a really globally epidemic problem. And I think robotics has a huge role to play in that. And so when we're looking at how do we help India, how do we help China, how do we help Africa, how do we help some parts of Latin America address this real shortage of high quality clinicians who, when their infrastructure isn't enough to graduate enough, I think robotics has a huge role to play in that. So this was the slide that I added right at the end, because we were talking about interfaces, and we were talking about how do you make something so that it's easy for the clinician to use it, and how do you map these sort of foreign degrees of freedom onto motions that your hands can make, and as the clinician be able to interpret what it is that you're doing. And so this is the interface for the new Ion, that catheter-driven robot. And you'll notice that the clinician's hands are on essentially 2 trackballs. So they are going in and out, and they are changing the pitch as that catheter goes around. And what's exciting about this, and this gets to the COVID question, is in light of the COVID crisis, bronchoscopies have come to a screeching halt globally. Because in a lot of ways, there's no more dangerous procedure than aerosolizing airway mucus when you're intubating and when you're doing a bronchoscopy. The exposure to clinicians in that operating room or in that bronchoscopy suite is enormous. Robotics lets you step away from the mouth of the patient. We'd never intended, when we were initially looking at building this robot, it was intended for biopsying small nodules out in the periphery of the lung where you couldn't get to with your hands because it was just too fiddly to be able to drive your way out there, too difficult to hold it and be able to get a high quality tissue sample. Now we have something that can actually do routine bronchoscopy without the surgeon, without the clinician having to be next to the patient. And so this is one of those interesting things where we talked about robots moving away, or robots allowing there to be more distance between the clinician and the patient. And while it was never the intended role for this particular robot, that is something that it may end up being a very important unintended consequence. So I added the QR code at the end so you can ask questions, and that's it. I think we're all now on to what we'd like to, how we'd like to answer questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Catherine. In fact, the audience can ask many questions, and they did. We have a list of questions. I don't think we have time to answer all questions, but so please try to be fast in your answer. So one is for Kanako, Professor Arada, and is about surgeons. So what is your experience about discomfort from surgeons over, for example, sort of distrust in surgeons by using advanced technologies, robots for surgery? Any experience, any comments?
I haven't observed such discomfort yet, but I believe that surely we will observe this kind of distrust when autonomy is employed. And this can be a common problem with AI. So we should share, we should exchange opinion with AI researchers about this.
Thank you very much. And maybe for team, are there any standards and validated and verified on precision and control effort? So for example, about penalizing jitter or jerky movement to achieve smooth motions. So what is, in your experience, the role of control, the role of mechanism design in order to make robots more usable for surgeons?
Sorry, Paolo, could you please?
Yeah, it's about precision and control. I mean, do you have any feeling and experience about how these factors can be managed in order to make robots more easily to use by doctors? Mechanism design and control, you know, what is your experience?
So maybe you should know my lab is 3485 certified, so we are official manufacturer of medical devices.
Exactly.
And typically do this. The challenge is that for me sometimes that if there's a cooperation with the medical doctors, they do not know the procedures we have to oblige if we design systems. So it's very simple for us to design a mechanism and get an ethical votum to bring it into the operating room. But if it fails for some reason, we have to argue why we design a new one.
I see.
It's not possible just to say, oh, let us do a different one that looks like experiments with humans. So we have to have a good record of the procedure, and we have to explain why we go from this approach to the next. But as I said, most recently with this automatic design, with these topology optimization with large displacement, it's quite interesting to design within a minute a new gripper or a new scissor or forceps, which is very convenient to be controlled by something else. But we still need an explanation, a written document why a specific approach failed and how the designs were used.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, this also relates to what I would like to ask on behalf of the audience to Catherine is about what is your feeling on the fact that technology may advance faster than regulatory, ethical, and legal framework? That is, in a sense, also related to what Tim said.
Yeah. There's a couple different ways of looking at the design of medical devices. And you can think of it as a clinical pull or a technical push. And I think often when people are expressing frustration that a new technology that has come out isn't getting adopted, it's because they're imagining all sorts of uses for this technology and they want to see this technology flourish, and yet they're not thinking of it from the point of view of what's the clinical problem that's really trying to be solved. And so when there's a very strong clinical problem, when there's a very clear clinical need for something, there's a clear path for technology to come in. And the regulatory structure is there to allow you to test that hypothesis that this is good. Where it seems to be most frustrating is when we don't have the regulatory barriers are the worst in the way when, or feel that they're the worst in the way when we don't have that clear clinical story. And so I actually think it's a good balance that we've got right now. I do think that some of the regulatory, some of the regulatory burden is not a burden of understanding, it's a burden of mistrust, in that the way data has to be collected by companies and reported and all of that sort of thing. So that's a huge burden, but it's not it's not a burden of it not evolving. It's
because we should never forget that in principle regulatory issues, the regulations are there to protect the patients.
Exactly.
So that's the point. So if we take it from the patient side, they are there not as obstacle for us engineers or companies or doctors, but to protect. Then of course they exceed. Okay, thank you. Just one question to team. Again, you mentioned about the challenge in design, and the question is about the efficiency of automatic design, from analysis to synthesis of mechanism. How much are you confident? How much really in your experience this works, and how this can be improved? Very quickly, please.
Who did you want to address that?
For many years, we designed specific manipulators for specific tasks for surgical applications. And so one day I had the feeling that we have to develop automatic and autonomous design tools, which allows us, for example, just to give a shape of an organ, an approach way, and want to get as result a device that is able to carry out exactly this movement, automatically creates the STL data for 3D printing and printing within 24 hours. So this is our approach at the moment to design tools, mechanisms that are able to perform specific movements.
Very good. Thank you very much. One question for Kanako is about your experience. This is related to COVID-19, for example. What is your opinion about collecting swab samples by means of robots? In your opinion and perception, is this something that could become feasible soon, acceptable, robust, reliable, and so on, affordable?
In my personal opinion, I don't know, the robotic swabbing can be a solution, the best solution for the PCR, robotic application for the COVID-19. But I'm very sure that surgical robotic technology can be used to protect surgeon, medical personnel from the infected people and also infected animals. And application for animals are more easy to be commercialized considering the regulation. So in my opinion, the robotic applications for the infected animal will be the first application for the robot.
Thank you very much. And maybe the final question for Catherine, it is about the accuracy of let's say, overlapping preoperative images with intraoperative images and action. And so what happens, for example, when the topology changes? So tissues are cut, how is this managed?
Yes.
And also, really the final question is about the affordability, really very short.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the cost of the robotic surgery procedure so far, and what happens in emerging countries, for example? But let's start first with the question about the technical question about.
It's like those are very different.
I know, but the other one is related more to the conclusion, for the panel.
Sure. So deformable registration, where as you are deforming the underlying structures and you want to morph the 3D that you have created, is a huge challenge. And there's a lot of people studying this all around the world right now, to different degrees of success. Right now, we're not doing deformable changes in the Da Vinci when we're overlaying. However, when you're navigating through the lungs, with the ion, at each intersection point, you can re-pin it to that intersection point in the 3D model of those lungs. And so even though the lungs are expanding and contracting and you're in this very dynamic environment, you are still able to sort of reattach where that model is to these very specific points. And so some forms of deformable registration are going to be easier to have out there soon. And others, it's going to be quite a while before we can track all of the landmarks. You know, we insufflate people and we tip them on their head and their organs move fairly far away from where they were when we did the preoperative image. And so being able to track key points on all of those organs and understand how that very heterogeneous set of tissue has moved and moved apart, and then pull your model apart and have it pinned to those is going to, like I said, lots of PhD theses, and then at some point we'll get it out into into the real world. Not that academia isn't the real world, sorry.
Okay,
But out into commercial robots. Speaking of commercial robots, your second question about why is it so bloody expensive?
Yeah.
So it's expensive in comparison to what? And you know, if you're trying to think about bringing a technology out that in both Tim and Kanako have been talking about training surgeons faster with this technology. If you can bring a surgeon to high capability very quickly in a way that the that the infrastructure of the educational system would be incredibly expensive to do, that robot starts to look cheap in comparison to building a much bigger surgical education system. And so when you're talking about cost, some of the fastest growing markets that we have are what you would think of as low and middle income countries. It's not that, you say, oh, it's $1 million robot, but $1 million robot is still cheaper than building a multi-million-dollar medical school. So you have to think about all of these things in the context of the entire healthcare economy that they're in. Where do they change the costs? They will never be free. They will always migrate costs from one part of the healthcare system to another. And if in the net, they make it more cost effective to make better medicine and better outcomes, then you have to look at the entire system. You can't analyze any one thing on its own. And when people say, oh, it's too expensive, I say, well, how much should it cost?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that it's time to close, and let me start first to see if I can share my screen. Yeah, this one. And just to conclude, first of all, of course, by thanking all the speakers, the panelists, for their really insightful and extremely useful thoughts. As you know, the colloquium has been recorded, so you can watch it again on the IFRR YouTube channel, and you can make questions. Actually, there are many questions that could not be posed for reasons of time, but you can make through Slido, and we will transfer the questions to our panelists so that you could get replies and get in touch actually with the panelists. And said that, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the IFRR to the next robotics colloquium. The speaker will be Professor Shigeo Hirose. This is actually the schedule of the next colloquia on different topics till the end of August, and more will follow. And let me keep this opportunity, in addition to thanking again all the speakers and IFRR board, our crew, which was extremely helpful and in managing this first colloquium. Thank you very, very much, and good morning to some, good evening to others, and good night to others, because this is a global issue. This is a global event. We are broadcasting the entire world. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks all.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.